As you may well now know, this weekend I'm riding Badlands, an 800-kilometer off-road, unsupported bikepacking race in southern Spain. I've never done anything like it in my life, and I'm partly excited and partly nervous and really dreading the race in a few days' time. But I think it should be a good adventure if I pace myself well and I keep on top of my nutrition. So in today's video, I'm joined by Andy Turner, a pro cycling coach, to get some much needed last minute advice on how to pace myself, how and what to eat, that balance of sports nutrition versus real food, and what to drink and how often to drink to prevent dehydration. So let's dive in and hear from Andy.
So Andy, thanks for your time today for some last minute prep before I head out to Badlands. So I guess we should start with pacing. I mean, it's 800 kilometers. I think I've got 5 days. The fast people do it in 45 hours. I'm somewhere in between the two extremes. The heat will be a factor. So I guess, how do I pace myself? I mean, I'm going to ride slowly. How can I break it down to more of a, not scientific, but have some strategy to how I ride slowly and pace myself and make sure I finish with a smile, hopefully?
It's an interesting one because in pacing terms, you have various sort of metrics for how people pace things, lactate thresholds, FTP, percentages of that. And to one extent, what you're wanting to do is keep it below the first lactate threshold. So there are things called intensity domains. You have the first one, moderate, which is all the way up to that first threshold, at which point you start using more carbohydrates, you start generating more fatigue metabolites that need clearing. And then you've got the next domain, which goes up to threshold. You're not going to be wanting to work at that level for that duration time and then beyond. But you don't want to be working sort of the upper end of your zone 2, that aerobic element of things, because especially with the heat that you're going to encounter and the duration of it, you find that these intensity domains or thresholds, they alter with fatigue, they alter with heat, they alter with altitude, they alter with how well fueled up you are. So you want to be keeping quite a low intensity for the entirety of the thing. I mean, there are people who specialize in these sorts of events. They push their first lactate threshold up massively high and they improve their capacity to work very close to that over long durations of time without it decreasing so much. But it's always better to start off a bit easier and then build up later on, because if you go too hard too soon, you get that drop in the relative thresholds, and then for the rest of the event, you're not able to go as hard as you would be able to otherwise. So it's kind of like negative pacing, but on a complete extreme compared to the likes of a 10-mile time trial. But yeah, you want to keep the intensity pretty low throughout your kind of low zone 2, not active recovery level, but you want to be able to keep going throughout the entirety of the event. So whereas you might get people doing their zone 2 rides 4 hours by themselves, maybe 30 kilometers an hour, as a sort of like equivalent, if you were doing it based on that, maybe around the sort of 26, 28 kilometers an hour, that kind of relative drop in intensity, because you don't want to be feeling as if after 4, 6, 8 hours that you're thinking, oh, I need a bit of a rest from this, because obviously there's a lot more still to go. So yeah, you kind of have to go easier than you think you would, just given how long the event is.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense, but it's not something I've trained, and you can't really train for such a long distance event without actually doing it to find out what it's all about. I guess going slower, that feels right, and then, like I say, ease into it, because recovery can be quite a tricky thing. Unless you sleep for a few hours, you'll be trying not to go too deep. Anytime you go deep, you won't have time to recover from those efforts, will you? See, like a big climb or a technical section. So anytime you go deep into reserves, you're not going to be able to recover enough, are you? So you're constantly emptying the engine and probably not topping up enough in terms of that recovery and giving the body a chance to get over those efforts. Yeah, just ride really slowly. In terms of, I'll have a power meter and heart rate. I know my zones. I guess I could start off by riding sort of to power, or keeping it below a certain power, and use that as a sort of a guide to start with until I get a feel for what that feels like in the heat, and then not look at my Garmin so much and just have a feel for what that pace feels like.
Generally, with these longer events, power can be useful to an extent, but as we mentioned, with sort of the thresholds changing as such with fatigue, heat as well. Heart rate is probably one of the key metrics because you see something in training sessions, you can tell when someone's gone a bit too hard on their aerobic endurance ride because you get something called cardiac drift, where the power might remain the same, but the heart rate drifts up slowly and throughout the duration of the ride. That's a good indicator that they're probably pushing a bit hard, maybe didn't fuel well enough, or several other elements where essentially the fatiguing factors were more present. Heat impacts this as well, the heart rate going up, altitude as well. Same power can result in a much higher heart rate relative. So with the heat coming in with this, you probably want to be focusing more on the heart rates because when that's spiking and remaining elevated, that's showing more what's going on internally, whereas the power is showing what you're doing externally. So you have your internal workload, which is how hard your heart is working, and the external workload, which is what you're getting out from that. So, for example, 150 watts would be the power you're looking at, and 130 beats per minute. You might find straight away in that heat, it's going to be 140 straight away. So the power external workload is the same, but internally your body is working harder, and that's the thing that you need to focus on, is what your internal workload is doing.
Very interesting. So probably better leaving the power meter at home and just using heart rate and going by heart rate for my pacing and keep that heart rate down low.
I think one of the useful things with power for these kinds of events more is the energy expenditure. It's not fully accurate because efficiency ratios of cyclists tend to fall somewhere within 20 to 25% efficiency. So for every joule of energy that goes to pushing the pedals around, 4 or 5 of them go to, 3 or 4 of them go to just expelled as heat. We're not particularly efficient. So the power meter reads your kilojoules, the unit of energy that's going through those for power. But sort of a nice, happy little coincidence is that there's about 4 kilojoules to every calorie. But then if you take the efficiency of 25%, it evens out. So for every kilojoule that's read through the power meter, that's roughly about 1 calorie used in terms of energy. It's not exact, but it's without doing lab testing. It's a reasonably good estimate. And the reason that's useful is for an event this long, you want to be fueling yourself up and not falling behind on it. So for example, 150 watts times by about 3.6 would be the calories per hour. So somewhere in the region of 530 calories an hour probably is what you'll be going through. And this is, you've got internal body fat, which contributes to that as well. But you don't want to put yourself in a state where you're just relying solely on that. So that's where you need to keep fueling. At those lower intensities, it will be a higher percentage of fats being used, but then the heat and fatigue setting in as your body struggles to basically supply oxygen to where it needs to because it's finding it difficult. It then looks for easier ways to break down fuel, and that's where you start using more carbs when you're fatigued or on the heat because it's easier to break down with oxygen aerobically than fat is, even though fat is more efficient. And that's why we're able to use fats at lower intensities where the body's under less stress. So if you add stress, i.e. increase of intensity, heat, fatigue, altitude, the body then needs to try and get its energy from easier sources. So that's where sugar becomes the preferable source, which is another reason why you want to keep it easy so you can keep that prioritizing fats as a fuel source because it's more efficient to be able to use them, but you have to go easier. But you can't keep replenishing carbs indefinitely, or you get all sorts of gastrointestinal issues. Whereas the human body, even a very lean one, is 7,000 calories per kilo of body fat. So at that intensity, that would, hypothetically, you were just using body fat. That's going to last you more than 12 hours just using that.
All right. Okay. That does bring me on to my next concern is eating. Like going slowly should make it easy to eat, but the longest ride I've done in training is 6-7 hours, which you can do on sport nutrition, maybe an ice cream from the petrol station or whatever. Can you give me an idea of what I should carry with me, like sports nutrition versus real food, and like sort of carbs and fat and protein? You mentioned 500 calories per hour. What's the best strategy for getting enough calories in and making sure I don't have any gut issues and my energy levels don't run low and kind of keep the body ticking along nicely for 2 or 3 days?
Yeah, so with the calorie use metric, you don't necessarily have to replace everything that goes out because of the body stores that you have, in the same way that we have a set amount of glycogen stores which last for about 90 minutes of high intensity. So for 90 minutes of high intensity, you don't need to be fueling during the session. That's not to say we're not going to be fueling during this, because although there are technically enough calories in body fat stores to probably last this, that's not the way our bodies work. In terms of eating, there's a lot of talk like with sugars. Obviously, you get insulin spike when you're off the bike. You don't get that issue with blood glucose spikes. I mean, for people who are non-diabetic, when you consume it during exercise, because the response is very different. But equally, when you start consuming more sugars, your body starts using more sugars because it thinks, right, this is what's available. It's nice and easy to access. I'm going to use more of that. I'd recommend you probably want to avoid fructose and go more glucose. So a bit more old school on the energy intake front, whereas energy gels used to be 20 grams of glucose, 3 of those an hour, 60 grams maximal an hour. Nowadays, it's that 120 grams an hour with 1-to-1 or 0.8 to 1 ratio fructose glucose. But the problem is when you consume fructose, the body likes using carbs more when you're giving that to it, essentially. Whereas using glucose, maltodextrin mix is probably quite a good one for using on that front. But you need to limit it to 60 grams an hour. It's not necessarily slower acting. It has still a very high glycemic index. But in the context of how your body will use the fuel, it's probably better to stay on the lower ends of carbohydrate intake and focus it on being glucose. But then you've got obviously the issue of 60 grams of carbs an hour, 4 calories per gram of carbs. It's not a huge amount of energy given how much you're using over that period of time. But that's where actually consuming fats is useful, because the body does like using them. And it's a lot more energy dense. There's 9 calories in every gram of fat. So I've done it before. I've done 12-hour rides where I've really heavily carbed, and then come the end of the ride, I just feel absolutely full because I've eaten such a volume of food and drink that I just don't want to eat anymore. And that's where consuming fats that are in a more easily digestible and accessible format are really quite useful. So it's sort of that short chain fatty acids, and ideally consuming it with limited protein, because that's not really essential for fueling aerobic exercise, but it does make digesting food take longer and take more energy. And the last thing you want to do is be wasting energy breaking down proteins. So foods that are sort of reasonably high in fat alongside the carbs actually can be quite useful. Packs of crisps, honestly, for this kind of event.
Really?
You've got some carbs, potatoes, nice glucose source. You've got fats in the form of oils, so it's not coming with a load of protein as well. And you've got salt, which, given the temperature, the amount that you're going to be sweating, when we sweat, we use salt as well. And you do have to replenish that. Obviously, too much salt for a sedentary, non-athletic lifestyle has risks in the same way too much sugar does. But then when you're doing 800 kilometers in 34 degrees, your needs change a lot to someone who's got a desk job and then not doing any activity in the evening.
Yes. So you mentioned glucose over fructose. That source can be gels or energy bars or like sports nutrition products. And then for fats, you're talking about like real foods that I can get from, you know, a petrol station, pack of crisps, and that sort of stuff.
You can kind of mix it up, because some people have really good tolerance to energy foods like gels, bars, drinks. Some people don't. Even sometimes it's mixed. I find I get on well with drinks and chews, but I really don't get on well with high carb gels.
Okay.
Things like the SIS Go gels, the standard ones rather than the Beta Fuel, they're good because they are just glucose gels. So sort of having a mix, really, because one of the things you get is kind of like palate fatigue. So I've had that in stage races where you just get bored of these sickly sweet things. You get to a point where you're kind of like craving bacon and vinegar. I go for those ones specifically because I remember rice cakes with lardons, egg, and vinegar in it being a really nice change from citrus energy drinks and berry sugar gels. So I think mixing it up is kind of the best way to go. If you know that you get on all right with sports nutrition and you know there are certain foods that you can comfortably eat, because at the lower intensity, it's going to be easier to eat them. In the same way that like trying to cram down a sandwich while you're at a threshold interval isn't practical. You don't need these gels, popping those when you're going at a relatively low intensity. But equally then, there's also the thing of carrying fuel with you. There's a practical element. It's not practical to carry a load of high volume, lower energy density foods, whereas the aforementioned like pack of crisps and things like gels and sachets of energy powder, they're a lot more transportable. So there's a practical element as well. But realistically, it's mixing real foods and sports nutrition, both from what you know you get on well with, what you can tolerate, but also what works with packing as well.
Yeah, I think that's my thought was kind of a mixture of carrying some sports nutrition, stuff that's light, sachets of powder and electrolyte tablets, and then hopefully rely on opportunities to get real food when there's opportunity. And in those shots where saying real food, anything, I guess it's down to personal preference in terms of like pack of crisps or a sausage roll or sandwich, whatever you can. There's no like anything off limits in that sort of regard. It's like just real food, whatever you like, keep going, and then that sort of mix of real versus sports nutrition.
Yeah, it's like the only thing I say people generally should avoid, and it's more in the US, is trans fats. Pretty much about it, because hydrogenated fats are being phased out from most foods in the UK. And aside from that, kind of any food has got a purpose. I know people say sort of like, oh, avoid processed stuff. A gel is incredibly processed. Everything's processed beyond just something plucked out of the ground. So yeah, it's having that balance of things. There's nothing really to avoid unless you've got specific allergies or you know there's things that don't agree with you. I know that dairy and citrus flare up my asthma, so I avoid those. Other than that, there's not any foods that I'd say that you necessarily need to avoid. Avoiding things that are massively high protein, like meats, just because they take more energy to digest, and that energy goes from then moving you forwards to dealing with consuming meat.
Okay. The other concern is the heat. It's going to be 35 to 40 degrees in Granada, where we start from. I have some experience riding the heat. We've had a nice summer in the UK, so I'm getting used to warmer weather, but not as warm. Riding a bike fast or a long way in the heat is another challenge in itself. So how can I mitigate the risk of the heat just melting me in the desert? What can I do? I mean, I'll be riding slowly, hopefully hydrating and eating. Is it about pacing again? Is it just not going too fast?
There's quite a lot of factors involved with this, because heat management's sort of one of the hot topics, pun not intended, with performance management at the moment. Obviously, you get people training in the heat, both to improve certain fitness elements, but also to adapt to performing in the heat, because the body likes to stay at the same internal temperature. And when we exercise, we generate a huge amount of heat. I mentioned with any unit of energy that goes to pedaling you forwards, 3 or 4 times that just goes to heat production. So we need to expel that in some form or another. I mean, the good news is going at lower intensity, you generate less heat because you generate less energy overall. So that in itself is useful. But then you're also traveling at slightly lower speeds, there's reduced airflow, and most of how we lose heat is evaporative. So sweat, the water comes through the skin, taking the heat with it, and then is evaporated, removing it from the bodies. So that's the key thing we need to maintain. Another element is sort of your temperature regulation centers, the hypothalamus just in the back of the head around here. And there is some research that keeping that specific area of the head cool can impact the overall core body temperature.
Okay.
So a helmet with good ventilation is massively important, but good ventilation at low speeds. And that's where a lot of World Tour tech is not particularly applicable to this, because You've got lots of helmets that are very good at cooling when there's high speed, high airflow, but when the airflow drops, they're not quite sufficient. So something that's very open structured is generally very, very good for ventilation. Like I know the POC Procyn Air, the
Yeah.
TT Road helmet, it's really well vented when you're going fast. But as soon as you go slow, it loses a lot of it. Whereas the Specialized S-Works Prevail Free, it's got a very open top structure because it's just got those carbon wires running through it. That's a really good helmet for, I recommend that one for gravel events or for ultra endurance ones. The only thing is maybe wear like a skull cap over because it's so open you don't want to get sunburn.
Yes.
So there's the equipment element of things, ensuring that you've got kit that is going to allow good moisture transfer, because again, that helps with the rate of sweat loss. Avoiding too many layers, like some people wear a base layer under a jersey, whereas most sort of highly breathable jerseys are actually designed to be more effective without a base layer, because it's just another layer of fabric for heat to have to travel through. And then obviously we've got the actual drinking and hydration element of things. A little note on humidity as well. If it's humid, the last thing you want to do is pour water over yourself because it will just heat up, but it won't evaporate.
Okay.
Whereas if it's a dry heat, then pouring water over yourself enhances the evaporation process. So
Good
it's
to know.
quite, it was Tour of Portugal a few years back racing that, and it was a humid heat. And making the mistake of pouring water over myself going up a climb and then just finding I was drenched in hot water essentially. And absolutely horrible. And the other thing with this being such a long event is there's a lot of research on hydration and performance. So the study that used to be quoted was as much as a 2% loss in body weight through dehydration could impact performance by 10 or 20%. I can't remember the exact number. But that study was done in a fairly untrained population, whereas there are ultramarathon runners who finish with sometimes a 10% drop in body mass, but the relative performance has not dropped by anywhere near that 10% figure because they're better trained for essentially performing while dehydrated. In the same way that carbs at 60 grams was the limit, now it's 120 beyond. Science changes quite a lot as people try out and experiment with new things. But I would say, given the duration of this event, it is actually quite important to be consuming the amount of liquids that you lose, because say generally in that sort of heat, at least a litre an hour of sweat is not uncommon. And if you're doing 45 hours, you can't lose 45 kilos of fluid because you'd have some incredibly serious issues well before you hit that point. So you've got to keep consuming. Even if you're consuming 500 ml an hour, you can't lose 20 kilos of fluid. You have to keep drinking throughout. And then you have the other problem of one of the common issues that ultra endurance runners have is hyponatremia, where they consume a lot of fluids, but they don't consume salts. And then what happens is fluid likes to travel to the salt. So they have salt in the bodies, they're drinking water. Actually, there's the salt transfer out from there. I can't remember this one exactly. But essentially what ends up happening is overhydration and saturation of cells with water. So drinking too much water without salt is quite a risk. You can get tests done for measuring your salt loss rate in terms of they'll take a sample of the sweat and determine what the millimoles, the concentration of salt is in the sweat. And then you need to work out how much sweat you're losing an hour, and you can work out how much salt you're losing an hour. So in that sort of temperature, kind of a good rule of thumb is probably 1 to 1.5 litres an hour. But if you know you lose more, I know I lose probably about 2 in that kind of heat, 2 litres an hour. And say I do a 3-hour long ride in some heat and I'm wearing a dark coloured jersey, I'll get back and there's white salt stains over it. So I know I'm quite a salty sweater, whereas some people just don't have that so much. So I find I'm consuming even up to 1 gram of salt an hour. And it's important to work that out. What is your best fit for what you need to consume, both total fluids, but also the salts with it, because the hydration is the combination of the two. If you're just doing water, you'll have problems. If you're not having enough salt, That's when the hypernatremia issue comes in, especially over such long durations and consuming as much fluid as you're losing, because over the course of that event, if it's your 3-hour road race and you lose 2 litres an hour and take 1 litre an hour in, losing 3 litres of fluid is not ideal, but it's not going to be a big problem. But you extrapolate that over a 45-hour event and it's a much different picture. So it's very different demands in terms of how much you need to be drinking, and then having the salts with it to make sure that you're actually taking in that water properly internally.
In terms of salts, you're talking about like electrolyte tablets, like the SIS tablets in a tube, those sort of tablets, put one of those in a bottle.
There's been quite a shift in recent years now, because those generally it's about 0.3, maybe a bit less milligrams of sodium, whereas we generally need more than that an hour. So the likes of Sturka, their tablets, they're quite a lot chunkier. So rather than 20 in a tube, you get 10, because they are, I think, 1,000 milligrams of 1 gram of sodium. And then SIS, Pure Sport, they all have now electrolyte sachets, which are a lot saltier. Like you put that in a drink and you can taste that it's fruity flavored salt water, essentially.
Yeah.
But precision hydration as well is another one. So there has been more of a shift to more salts now. And this is partly because essentially Gatorade started this off, slight detour of things, but they started things off by making their performance sports drink, which was water with salt, which was great for hydration. But all of the football players they were giving it to thought it tasted disgusting. So they shoved a load of sugar into it as well to make it tasty. Okay. And what they made was a hydrating energy drink. So it was a very effective energy drink, but then it was being sold in supermarkets and people were necking bottles of salt and sugar and not doing any activity and having all sorts of issues. So then the salt levels were dropped because safety concerns, sugar remained high, and it's just advised to not have so much sugar. But it's kind of roundabout way saying that it used to be you had enough salt and sugar in these energy drinks to be functional. Then they took out some of the salt because safety concerns of people consuming it outside of sport. And now the sort of trend has gone back in that you're getting these sachets of higher sodium content electrolyte sachets, which are more effective for hydration, but in an endurance sport environment where you're actually losing fluids, losing salts, losing electrolytes, and needing to replenish them.
Can you take too much salt though? Because I'm a medium sweater. I haven't done one of these sweat tests, so I have no idea. But can you sort of apply sort of basic rule to like every other bottle you do a tablet, or every bottle you want salt in there? Or
it's generally better to split it fairly evenly, but then there's also a taste element of it as well. Like sometimes you just want plain water. So I'd say every other bottle is probably quite a good one, because if you're doing then maybe around 0.5 gram of sodium an hour, you'll probably start feeling it. Again, the body is quite clever in knowing what it wants. So you'll start feeling almost a bit of a salt craving when it starts to become too low.
Okay.
And if you're feeling overly thirsty than what you'd expect, that's probably another sign that you need more salts, because although you're drinking water, you're not necessarily absorbing it. It's more flushing through, and then you're having the issues with hypernatremia if it progresses beyond that. So the body's quite good at telling you whether you need it. It's just listening to those signs. So if you start getting to a point where you're feeling excessively thirsty, make sure you put in an electrolyte tablet in with the drink as well. And otherwise, it's probably going to be the case you're not going to quench that thirst. You want to drink more water, and then you have the potential for issues to arise.
Okay, yeah. Those cravings are interesting, because we're told to like drink before you're 30, eat before you're hungry, because if you're hungry or 30, too late. In terms of cravings for salty or fatty food, that's something else. That's not like an alarm system, is it? But
it's generally, it's the same with all things. You should be doing it before you need it as such. But the alarm system kind of comes in when the body's like, right, I really need this now. It's quite good at that sort of thing. It's in the same way that when you're doing exercise and you start feeling the bonk coming along, the way to fix it tends to be sugar, because it's fast acting, gets in the body quickly. You crave it, you consume it, and it does the job. So the same with like once you are thirsty or once you're feeling really in need of something, the body needs a little bit of time to take it in and recover. Whereas for a sort of continual event like this, you don't want to get to that point where you need to ease back to get back into it. You want to be able to do it at a consistent pace, essentially.
Okay, sound good. So to recap, I'm riding slowly. I'm doing some glucose, not fructose gels. I can eat fatty foods, salty foods, and drink lots of water and lots of salt to make sure I don't dehydrate and die in a desert. Any other last words of wisdom or tips for, not just for me, but other people watching this, doing their first ultra or to survive and have a good time and do your best performance, really?
Yeah, I'd say it's look at all of these aspects of what you need to complete the event and kind of work backwards from there. And then while you're doing it, enjoy that process of it. I've done a few of these like longer events, nothing quite like this, where stepped out too hard, have been in an absolute box of pain for the rest of the day and really not enjoyed it. So it's best for pacing to start easier, but also it's a lot better for enjoyment as well. No one wants to spend hours having blown up, still groveling around on the bike.
Yeah.
So I think with all things bike related, making sure you're actually enjoying what you're doing, taking the experience as well, and have fun with it.
Cool. Well, thanks, Andy. Thanks for your time. Thanks for your insights. I feel much more confident now about my approach for this event. So, thanks for your time.
Oh, you're very welcome and good luck with it.
Thank you.